was misled, or rather the course of events defied all human foresight. Could one have foreseen that Murat would commit nothing but stupidities, and Dupont, in act of cowardice, to surrender at Belen, July 22nd, 1808? The Spanish will one day regret the loss of the Constitution I gave them. It would have given the country new life. It was Dupont's greed, his grasping spirit, his desire to preserve at all costs his ill-gotten fortune which led to the Spanish revolt. The surrender at Belen ruined everything. In order to save his wagons of booty, Dupont committed his soldiers, his own countrymen, to the disgrace of a surrender which is without parallel, and to the disgrace so damaging in its effect on the Spanish people, of giving proof of the acts of sacrilege and church robbery that their general had tolerated in order to cover his own depredations. When Dupont stipulated that the soldiers' packs would be examined and his own wagons go untouched, he wrote his own shame into the pages of history forever. These are the caudine forks of our history. The sight of the stolen objects was a signal for the rising, and the ringleaders made use of them to incite the superstitious people to vengeance. Returning to the affairs of Spain in general, the emperor said that intelligent people, those who knew something of him, would never suspect him of having wished to debase the sovereign authority. I look at these things from a higher standpoint, he went on. I am too conscious of my strength to stoop to such intrigues so far beneath my character. I proceed more frankly. It would be a more reasonable approach, perhaps, to say that I shape my policy as a torrent shapes its course. While you were at Petersburg, you must have heard the details of the revolt from the Russian envoy to Madrid and from Chernichev, who came to Bayonne, for the Emperor Alexander, who for a long while refused to recognize King Joseph, did in time come to realize that I had nothing to do with those intrigues. The Emperor discussed Monsieur Talleyrand. He boasts that the disfavor in which he thinks himself held arises from his supposed opposition to the war in Spain. In truth, he didn't urge me to it at the moment when it began, for I was myself far from seeing the events which afterwards took place and which brought it about, but no one was more convinced than he that the cooperation of Spain and Portugal, and even the partial occupation of those states by our troops, was the only way of forcing the London government to make peace. He was so strongly of this opinion that this was the object in negotiating with Izquierdo the treaty Duroc signed at Fontainebleau. Talleyrand was the moving spirit of those negotiations, although he held no office. This method of forcing the English to make peace with the object of securing the evacuation of those states, seemed to him imperative. He brought great energy to bear on the situation too, when the departure of the court of Lisbon for Brazil altered all our plans. It was he who sent Izquierdo to Madrid. If it were not that he had a great interest in the success of that journey, I should have suspected him of contributing to the anxiety that came upon the king when his agent arrived at Madrid. Talleyrand, realizing later that he had been mistaken in the hopes of fortune and influence that he had built upon these treaties, and realizing that I was doing without him, thought himself tricked. Being a clever man, he has since attempted nothing but to justify himself in the eyes of the public for the part he is known to have taken in this affair, and he has constituted himself the apostle of discontent. He forgets that he also conceived the idea previously of deposing the dynasty in Spain, as we had done in Etruria. I am far from reproaching him for that. He has good judgment. He is the most capable minister I've had. Talleyrand was too well informed about public affairs and too good a politician to admit that the Bourbon could return to Madrid when there were no longer Bourbon at Paris or Naples. Time might perhaps have brought about this change without violence. The interests of France and even those of Spain, if rightly understood, pointed in that direction. There was never anything settled on the point, an infinite range of conjecture, as on all the more far-reaching political questions, and that was all. Talleyrand saw and pointed out to me all that intelligent people were thinking and that policy demanded. In a difficult position, In a war against a section of Europe, could the French take the risk of having a hostile dynasty on their flank? Talleyrand, who is among those who had done most to establish my own dynasty, was too much concerned in its maintenance, too clever, too far-seeing, not to advise everything which would tend to its preservation and to the preservation of tranquility in France. He sided against that war only because he was not made a minister with plenary powers as he had hoped. Forgetting then that it was French blood which was being spilt in Spain, he began, like a bad citizen, to preach against the affair more loudly as he saw it taking a bad turn, with him as with many people. One would need to be always successful. I knew what he was up to, and I made him feel that I did, because his ill will began with the defeat of Dupont. Like a coward, he threw stones at me when he thought I was beaten. Everything that has been done against the Bourbons has been done under his ministry and at his suggestion. It was he who kept preaching to me about how necessary it was to take all political influence away from him. It was he who persuaded me to have the Duke of Enghien arrested, to whom I did not give a thought until the prefect Chier and the English intrigues of Drake at Munich drew the attention of the police upon him. At the time, I was far from attaching the least importance to his stay on the banks of the Rhine, and consequently I was far from having any settled intentions with regard to him. It was either Moncey or Chet, who then told me that he often came to Strasbourg. I had not known of it. Berthier and Combeferre were doubtful about having him arrested on account of the court at Baden. Talleyrand insisted, and so did Murat and Fouché. Taken in by the revolutionaries and urged on by them, Murat, alarmed by Fouché and Rodier, saw no safety for himself or for me as soon as he heard of the Duke's arrival in Paris, except in his execution. To listen to him, one would have thought the government was threatened and the commandant of Paris in danger. He's a brave man on the battlefield, Murat, but he has no head. He likes only intriguers and is always taken in by them. All the men who had taken part in the revolution, the generals, the men bred in republican ideas, were disturbed by my advance to power. The royalists, intriguing still and clumsy, spread the rumor without giving much thought to it that I was going to play the role of monk. I was not steady in my seat. To hear Murat, Fouché, and the rest, one would have thought that public opinion was drifting out of my control. That, in this uncertainty, no party supported me. That the weak royalist party regarded me as only a transitional figure. No party, moreover, could achieve anything. The nation then would be against me. The revolutionaries were afraid of me, but still more afraid of the Bourbons. They scared Murat and made him lose his head.